Hello, everyone, and welcome to Historia Canadiana. My name is Patrick, and with me, as always, is my co-host and master of the Wiener Roast, Mackenzie.
Hi there, I'm a weenie roast. But that's actually kind of suitable for what we're talking about today, having a wiener roast at the same time?
How so?
I mean, we're telling folk tales. What better way to tell scary stories than around the fire?
Okay, so spoiling it right off the gate, it is as if, once again, people don't read the titles. But welcome,
sorry, I just
everyone.
assume our audience are idiots.
Exactly. Welcome to our Halloween interlude extravaganza. We're screwing up the whole timeline that we're doing just to talk about Halloween and,
Woogie.
see folk tales in Canada. So yeah, it's going to be a bit more of a fun time, a bit more like our sister show, Pop Canada, which you can find on Patreon for only $3 a month, just laying it out there. And thank you very much for our very first patron, Elise, for signing up already.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at some other accessibility. Who knows, maybe put out the first couple episodes free just to, like, entice people to want more. We're the dealers.
Or just, tell them that our next episode is going to be about Denis Villeneuve, which is very
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, very cool.
Very cool. Interesting person.
Definitely. Just to kind of give the people a sense of what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about 3 different tales, or at least themes that relate to Canada and their folk legends, right? So we're going to be talking werewolves today, we're going to be
Loup-Garou,
talking ghost ships, and we're going to be talking flying canoes. And that one sounds insane, but it's a bona fide classic, and we have to talk about it, and it's great.
It's so Canada.
Yeah, very much so. And honestly, I'm more excited for that one than any of the ones we're talking about today.
Yeah.
And we're leaving it to the very end.
Yeah, if you're, the werewolf ones is more just to it's going to be talking about like myths and origins. Ghost ships, we have some fun science to discuss.
Yeah. I
got some fun science facts. And the flying canoe is just Canada. It's as Canadian a ghost story can get, really.
Yeah. La chasse-galerie. Oh, yeah. I can't wait. Anyway, Mackenzie, since you're the one out of us two who's really more interested in folk tales and folklore and myths and stuff like that, how about you start us off and kind of define or help us understand what folk tales entail, what they represent for you, or how you would generally define them?
Well, because if you're looking at folklore and folk tales, you have to make a major differentiation with how that is from a fairy tale, a myth, a legend, because these are all different sort of categories.
Okay.
And the biggest distinction you have to make is folk tale versus fairy tale. And so we all know what a fairy tale is. Folk tales are often much smaller, if I want to use a word for it. In my mind, I've always seen them much smaller. There's no castles, princes and princesses. Folk tales are often very much the peasantry, common folk. Localized. The entire story, will take exactly, localized tales. Each one ends up is told differently depending where you are as well. Each sort of town, village, city you go to has its own set of specific folk tales that don't travel as far. Everybody knows the basic fairy tales internationally. But folk tales, I find, very much stay where they are, and they don't move. For example, nobody outside of Montreal is going to know about the buried nuns inside the Grey Nuns residential building of Concordia, which is true. I know people who have found the burial places for the Grey Nuns.
That's terrifying, by the way. That should be a ghost story in and of itself.
It is a ghost story. It's great.
But is there actually written? Is it just because people found them by accident? Are there archive records of them being buried there, or is it just kept hidden and we just found them one day? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I'd hope that it was archived, that dead people like Concordia knew about the bodies that were buried there.
I don't know.
But it's something I'd have to look into. It might have been it was archived before, but then the archives were lost when it was being changed hands to Concordia. There might have been a miscommunication of information.
Mm-hmm. I know one of the people who was implicated in buying the building, actually. I mean, he might know. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, go on.
Yeah, just to give a bit more context to people who, again, like don't know this folk tale or this little folk legend of Montreal.
Right.
Is there's Concordia University, which has, and it has, what do you call them, dorms?
Yep.
Yeah, so one of the dorms is called Grey Nuns because it's based where the old Grey Nuns used to live and pray and go about their work. And it was discovered some years ago that the bodies of the Grey Nuns are still buried there. Like from a long time ago, people like found the bodies.
Wait, they never moved them?
They probably moved them now.
Oh, okay. Because you said still buried there. I was like, what?
Hold on, I'm gonna check that one. But yeah, no, like they moved them. I'm like 60% sure they moved them.
That's a high estimate. Maybe
it's a passing grade. Okay. Yeah, they left. They left.
Okay, cool.
But that's example like a folk tale is folksy and it's local people who know it, you know? You're not gonna know lots of other people's folk tales traveling to other places.
Exactly. And they have from what I understood, they have themes and they have references to things that wouldn't necessarily be found elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
In essence, we're talking about stories today that can have fantastical elements, and a lot of them do, of course, right? As we'll see.
Like flying canoes.
Like flying canoes don't actually exist, surprisingly enough. Sadly enough.
Damn.
But you know, they're grounded in a certain reality, and they're grounded in certain values and morals that pertain to a specific place and a time that have kind of passed on from generation to generation.
And of course, like as certain places change, they take on certain values. Witches, for example, are going to have certain traits. Their witches are universal, but witches are treated differently everywhere you go.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's an excellent point. So, unless you have anything else to add, how about we get on to our first spooky topic of this sugar shack of horrors.
Okay.
I was trying to make a riff on Treehouse of Horrors, and it kind of failed.
It failed. Oh god, a Treehouse of Horrors.
Do they still do that?
They still do. It's diminishing returns every year.
Of course it is. Because there's only so many Alfred Hitchcock references that you can make.
Alfred Hitchcock, Steven Kubrick, whatever you want.
Steven Kubrick.
Well, yeah, because they did the Shining references in one.
It's Stanley Kubrick or Stephen King, dude.
Oh. I don't know and I don't care, says the English lit student.
So,
to be specific, I don't like horror, but I like folklore.
Yeah, that's fair. Where do you fall on thrillers?
It depends.
Okay. So, how about we start talking about werewolves?
Let's do it.
So, like many of the tales that we're going to be talking about today, werewolves have their origins, or at least as we know them today, and as they came into North America, they have a lot of their origins in the so-called Old World, right? Mm-hmm. In Europe, many of these tales were brought here by settlers, and they mixed in with local tales, local myths, right?
First Nation myths and tales.
Exactly, right? And the werewolf is one of those ones that really took a lot from Native American tales. And there's a huge element that we're going to be talking about later that really took a lot from First Nations.
Well, yeah, the whole idea of like animal spirits and all that is very deep rooted into First Nations mythology.
Definitely.
Their sort of belief system.
And just the very idea of what the werewolf represents, I would argue, comes from indigenous populations.
Mm.
And we can discuss that later, but I would think so, because it's slightly different in Europe originally. Yeah. So in Europe, the stories of these werewolves, or Loup-Garou, as they would be known in places like France, date back all the way to the Middle Ages, at least as we would recognize it today to be a werewolf.
Yeah.
And where tales of werewolves, they often involved chivalrous and loyal men, not unlike every other story in the Middle Ages. Just see Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, or every Arthurian tale and every poem that came out at that moment. And these loyal men were often transformed into these beasts by female magic and treachery.
These men got bamboozled.
They got bamboozled hard, right? And if you want any examples of that, by the way, we're not going to be covering them here specifically, but if readers...
That's European, and we don't like European. I'm kidding. Of
All
course.
that whole continent just rejected out of hand. No, but if listeners want any examples of this vague idea that I'm talking about, you can see tales like William and the Werewolf and Arthur and the Gorlagon. They all kind of touch upon this thing that it's often female witches or temptresses that turn good men bad. Right?
See the Brothers Grimm for more details.
Definitely. Funny enough, while we do call them werewolves today, a lot of these stories involve people transforming themselves into any number of beasts.
Oh, yeah.
Pigs,
owls,
birds.
bears, boars. If you really want to think about it, the original would have been with Circe in the Odyssey.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, great. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, definitely. The Odyssey is way up there. I don't know why.
Yeah. This idea of people getting turned into animals as a sort of punishment is something, we say late Middle Ages, you can find this going back thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
Animals have always been a part linked to this idea of regression, because that's one of mankind's big conceits, is that we are more developed than these creatures that we share similarities with. So animals are a great way to link to mankind's baser instincts, to sort of put it into context. And that's why you can see why certain animals turn back certain ways. So why I guess probably came about werewolves is because it became such a male dominated thing, because the wolf and the dog is always seen in these stories usually with a masculine lens,
Definitely.
The idea of lone wolf hunters and so on, or we're linked with pigs.
100%.
Which is the other big one I find.
Yep. I'm just thinking off the top of my head in this case, it's kind of I'm thinking more late Middle Ages, just because of this idea of there's a redemptive quality, I think, to these stories in the late Middle Ages. Right? They're good men that, despite themselves, were turned into these things. Right?
There's treachery afoot.
Exactly. Whereas often, if I remember my Odyssey correctly, it was a direct punishment that men were. I haven't read it in years, I have to admit, but if I remember correctly,
it's the Odyssey. If I remember correctly, it's like Odysseus was separated from his crew, and then they got turned into pigs. I think it was partially treachery from Circe, but it was also like, she was like, the punishment was like, you're trespassing on my island, therefore I'm going to turn you into pigs. But it's like, that's a bit of a harsh punishment, lady.
Yeah, they defied the gods, though.
Exactly. Well, like some gods, because some gods were like, oh, we fucking hate you, Odysseus. See Poseidon. Meanwhile, Athena's like, no, Odysseus is my homeboy. He's my chosen one. And so she was like, no, don't do it. So they defied the gods, but they were also working for the gods. It's a whole thing. The gods are fickle.
Yeah, and nowhere is that more true than in Greek myths.
Yeah, but if you like also just the idea of animals, and if you want to go up north for Norse mythology, Loki was a bona fide shapeshifter all the time.
Yeah.
That was how what was it? He turned into a female horse. He then had sex with a male horse and gave birth to a child or something.
Did he really? Of course he did. Why am I questioning this? Of course he did.
There's a lot of instances of Loki using the transformation and the idea of shape-shifting to represent fluidity, and then churning into these, like, changing his gender and then getting, like, impregnated, having children that way.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know what to say to that. That's weird, and it's exactly what I'd expect.
Norse mythology is like, it's bananas.
Oh yeah, it's everything you'd expect from mythology, but on crack.
Most Norse mythology started when the frost giant Ymir like sweated, and like his blood and sweat created like mountains and the rivers and everything.
Okay, yeah.
But going back to werewolves.
Anyway, the point is, okay, no matter where they originate, it's like the shape-shifting thing, as you say, goes back really a long time. But the point that I'm laboring to make in this case is that werewolves and many tales in the Middle Ages obviously try to become these morality tales.
Mm-hmm. There's always this idea we have to keep away from our base desire, this primal, like, again, keep away from your animal instincts.
In this case, women.
Yeah.
Because
Deny your lust. And
deny your lust and, just reject feminine wiles, I guess. Like, beware that they can be mischievous.
Yeah. Well, I also think there's a big thing of these stories taking on more and more traction as time went on, due to the fact reason became the predominant mode of thought.
Okay.
Age of Enlightenment, all that sort of forced this idea of we have to present reason above all else. And the very opposite of reason is primal instinct.
Okay,
which
that's
is why
very interesting.
Which is why I find, like, because we always had these stories, but they get really really morality based later on with like the Victorian tales, or before that in colonial tales. They even start to see it then.
Oh yeah, for sure.
This major pickup.
Oh yeah, and obviously a great part of the colonial project was to have this moral high ground, right? So yeah, definitely. And
which is another part of it, religion.
Yes, right? And that's kind of where I'll end this examination of the old world thing, is that obviously a lot of these stories, while related, for example, to women, were also kind of viewed or presented as having a certain figure behind the scenes of it all, and that is none other than our boy Satan.
It's in, like, every time they defeat the evil creatures, they use holy weapons. Yep. Blessed silver, holy water, like all the fun stuff.
Oh yeah, and that's definitely going to come back later when we talk about specific tales as they relate to Canada.
Let's do it.
Okay, so fast forward from the late Middle Ages, a couple centuries, say, and you get a bunch of French settlers and English settlers that come to North America, and Dutch settlers and Spanish and whatever. A bunch of people come to North America with these folk tales. Mm-hmm. And as we've covered many times on the show, they encounter, obviously, other populations, right? The First Nations. Now, the First Nations have this really interesting tale, okay, that is very similar to what we would imagine today to be the werewolf. Right? Mm-hmm. And some listeners might already be aware of it, mostly because of an episode of Supernatural, the hit CW TV show, which is where I also kind of first encountered. Is it on its final season for real?
Finally.
That's at least how I encountered this figure in the first place. I'm talking about the Wendigo. And if you've never seen a picture of the Wendigo, just look it up very quickly while you're listening to this, and I might put an image of it in the show notes. It is horrifying. Okay?
Oh, dear Lord.
We are way beyond, by the way, just turning into a pig and an owl and a wolf.
Oh, good God. I'm looking at pictures of this now.
Okay, describe what you're seeing for the listeners who might not have looked up the...
Well, it's like, it's got the bottom half of a goat, and then your head is this, like, mutilated moose head.
I think it's supposed to be a deer.
Yeah. And then the arms are just these, like, long demon appendages. And, like, it's almost like the rib cage is showing. Oh, This is awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Design-wise, super cool. The natives nailed it. Okay.
This is great.
What's interesting about the Wendigo is also kind of what it does and how it comes about. And I don't remember if they did that on the episode of Supernatural, but in First Nations tales, and this is especially apparently Algonquin nations that mostly had this tale, it's mostly a monster who feeds on flesh and preys on the weak, and those who were kind of ostracized or who deliberately left the community or were put apart from the community. So you get this cannibalistic element mixed with the design that Mackenzie just...
Wait, so is the Wendigo supposed to be a human that was transformed? Or?
It's ambiguous. I think it varies from tale to tale. In some cases, it's a spirit, much like cosmic forces and spirits do show up in First Nations tales. In some occasions, I've also seen a version of the tale in which it's a spirit that inhabits an actual person and transforms them into a creature that becomes cannibalistic.
Okay.
It's one of those things that changes depending on what tribe or nation or group you're a part of.
So I'm just looking at this and, like, because folktales are made to explain things, right? They're made to explain the things we don't know and don't understand. And you're saying they were mostly found with Algonquins as nomadic plains travelers. And so for me, it speaks to, it was probably a basic hunting animal, because that's what hunting animals do. They attack the weak and those who are separate from the herd kill them, and they probably just didn't know what the monster or whatever animal it was, and so they made the monster.
Definitely. And, First Nations people used stories just as much as Europeans, as we mentioned before, to kind of explain something, right? Or to get a point across. And in this case, especially
get several across a lot of the time. Their oral tales were much more complicated than ours were.
Oh, for sure. And, in this case, especially with the Wendigo, you get this idea of like, don't separate from the group. Don't go out into the forest alone.
Stay with the herd.
Stay with the herd and, be a part of the community. It's so simple and yet extremely effective. Much like you were mentioning, for example, in like the Brothers Grimm tales. A lot of these, we imagine the Disney versions now, but a lot of these were tales that were meant to like tell children to not go into the forest alone because there's shit that can kill you out there.
Or turn you into like a demon or something. Remember, kids, don't prick spinning wheels that you don't know.
What's interesting is obviously, so just about us talking about it, you can kind of see and put together pieces of where a lot of our modern image of the werewolf comes from, right? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the image that we have today isn't just a guy who was cursed into becoming a pig. A lot of it is this kind of deformed and atrocious creature that does feed on human flesh. Like that's a lot of what we imagine a werewolf to be today, or at least I do.
Oh yeah, no. There's definitely, again, like pop culture has made a certain shift for things like werewolves and other monsters of the night. But the reality is, like, they were designed to be these creatures that like ate the jugulars of people,
And so you get this mix, obviously, of French settlers. Let's take the example of New France for our purposes here, of French settlers and First Nation tales that kind of mix into what they would call the Loup-Garou, literally translate to werewolf.
I love that word. So it's just Loup-Garou.
Right? It kind of rolls off the tongue.
Did you ever play like the Loup-Garou game?
Oh yeah, of course.
Such a fun game.
It's very fun. I don't know if people are wondering what that game is from outside of French-speaking places. There must be an English version of it.
It's called Werewolf in English.
Yeah, there is an
like,
English version.
You might know it as Mafia.
Yeah, or Among Us.
Yeah, Among Us. It's like Among Us, but it said like you're just sitting there, Yep.
Anyway, completely aside, there are so many tangents in this.
Well, because you can see like how it the example of the Loup-Garou game is a great way to see how the folktale has been passed down.
Oh yeah, definitely.
This idea of like the werewolf as now being ostracized in the other, because then I find in a lot of today's, when you see these modern interpretations of the animals, you see this large part of trying to accept the monster. That's like, we want to accept the monster, which is good. And it reflects our shift in mentality of monsters and the other, and how we must learn to like work with them. As back in the day, you kill it.
Yeah.
You're different, you die.
You certainly do. There's no trial. There's no like trying to understand.
Burn the witch, people.
There's no Beauty and the Beast moment. It's just die.
It's just kill the beast. You get the Beauty and the Beast moment, but only the stuff with Gaston.
Just to kind of sum this all up. So basically, after a few decades of these stories kind of mixing together, you get a new version of the Loup-Garou, of this person who transforms into this cannibalistic monster. But there's the added morality tale, and certainly a tale that kind of takes on many aspects that the French at that time would have found absolutely terrifying, right? So obviously, as we just mentioned, the First Nations had this idea of like stay with everyone, but the settlers obviously had a slightly different perspective on it when they came here, of the possibility of starvation, the possibility of going insane. You don't know what's out there in the woods, right? You are constantly under threat of things that you don't know.
Right.
So this werewolf really becomes a stand-in not only for morality, but for genuine concerns that people would have had at the time.
You're gonna have to tell me to stop at certain points, because I could keep talking about this for days, because I love
go for it.
Werewolves, especially as a lasting image of monsters in the bestiary. It's just fascinates me that the wolf especially, and especially when you see werewolves these days, like now we're seeing a bit more of a pack, but when they come up in these folktales, it's always wolf singular, which I find always a bit strange due to the fact that the wolf is known for being a pack figure.
Mm-hmm.
And the wolf's social structure is one of the most complex in the animal kingdom.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah, behind eusocial insects and us.
That's never something I've actually studied, but that makes perfect sense.
And I find it interesting that whenever werewolves do come up, they're always the singular.
There is kind of a disconnect when you think about it.
Yeah, like what an actual wolf behaves like. But for my, are wolves, are they only North American? Are there wolves out in...
I'm pretty sure there's some in Europe.
Yeah, if they had dogs, they had wolves.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
actually, no, I'm absolutely certain there are some in Europe because, and this kind of segues perfectly into our first story because...
Man, bear, pig?
No. It's kind of segues perfectly into our first story, which is actually looking at a newspaper story that came out in Quebec in the middle of the 18th century that was greatly influenced about events that were happening in France at that time.
Okay.
Bit of context. This one is kind of circulated a lot around. I saw a lot of articles on it on the internet. So it's, I have a feeling a lot of people would know about this one, but I just wanted to kind of use it as an introductory look or an introductory glance into how much the werewolf image permeated and how it represented different fears later on, right? Other than just insanity and starvation and loneliness.
Yo, this werewolf is hairless and it's just a wolf.
That's an image of the Beaugrand, which is basically the French version of a werewolf.
Yeah, no, you see, if you look up pictures of like what we thought werewolves were from back in the day, they're basically just, a lot of time they turn into animals versus the more like Hollywood-esque bipedal shaggy monsters that we think of them as. When in reality, when most of these people turned into like their animals, they were slightly more just like bigger, more monstrous versions.
Yeah.
They weren't really like these bipedal shaggy beasts.
Definitely. So in 1767, the Quebec Gazette, the Gazette de Québec, started publishing a news story that warned its citizens or its readers that lurking around the walls of Quebec was a werewolf that was hunting people and supposedly just lurking and had been stalking through the colony.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually kept on going for quite some time. This idea, like, it stayed in the news for like a few issues. I find fascinating, right? So you get these descriptions of basically this shrouded figure that maybe looked like a wolf and was seen hunting around, and people had to really be careful to go outside at night because or else they would be hunted by this beast that nobody quite knew what it looked like, but was clearly a werewolf.
I love it. And it was probably just some animal that they had never run into before.
That, or just like things move in the dark and go bump in the dark.
It literally could have just been stray dogs.
It quite literally could have. And it also helps to know that around this time, as I was saying, in France, there had been a series of slaughters of people and animals by packs of wolves around this time.
France has been fighting a werewolf epidemic.
That's how it was described. It was literally described in France as being like this epidemic, and this whole thing, it was almost a panic that werewolves were back. And
well, I think there's this idea of you want it to be a person that kills you and not an animal. They can't accept the fact that a lowly pack of wolves would kill such refined creatures such as humans. Only humans kill humans.
I've never thought of it. That actually makes perfect sense. Like
that's why these monsters are so exaggerated. Because if you look at all these monsters, they're either terribly big, exaggerated beasts, or they're like man transformation beasts. Even in something as simple as Little Red Riding Hood, it's the big bad wolf. It's not just a wolf.
Right.
Like there's this big idea like mankind has to deny the fact that we were taken down by some animals.
Interesting.
We're more refined now. We have bigger swords than they do.
Yeah, and I guess you would also have that kind of explains there's an added element of the supernatural to it.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of says, okay, well, it's not just a regular wolf. It goes beyond just a normal thing. It's a 6-foot tall wolf that can run faster than a train, or
it can blow entire houses down with just its breath.
Yeah, exactly, right. They as you say, it's exaggerated and blown out of proportion because it has to, and it makes for a more interesting story.
Yeah, and like that's also just how tales work. Like because folk tales are always passed word of mouth first. Again, like the Grey Nuns one, you're not going to find a lot of stories written about it, but like from each telling, people get the facts wrong, they misremember, and then things get more and more exaggerated. With Old World tales again, like First Nations oral tales, they were so strict on their oral stories, like those don't get exaggerated. But with European-based stories, there's always going to be more constant exaggeration.
Just to cap off with this story a bit, again, I'm going over it very briefly because there's a lot of
there's a lot to talk about.
There's a lot of articles and a lot to talk about, and it's kind of a fun introduction. But it went on for actually a couple of months, and there are times when the people actually got in on hunting this thing down, right? And so the article mentions that I'm looking at.
Get a posse together.
Right. The article that I'll link to in the description mentions by October they were sending dogs upon the werewolf over and over again. They were going out hunting with their own packs to kind of hunt it down. In November, they said that it had finally been destroyed, but then the beast came back again in December, and the paper gave a chilling warning. Beware then of the wiles of this malicious beast, and take good care of falling into its claws. Yeah. And then no one ever talks about it again. Literally, it just goes away.
Because they found proof.
It's just never mentioned again. That's just literally where the story ends. And I both love and hate that.
Because that's what a lot of folktales are, though. Because it was probably like 10 different stories that all became one. Because one guy says he sees a werewolf. That's crazy. But if 10 guys are all going, well, I saw something move in the dark too. Because these 10 guys are all covering for each other now. If one guy's just trying to cover his ass for being a coward, then like he'll get called out on his lies. Yeah. But if you have a group of guys who are like, no, I'm not a coward, or he's not a coward, because if he's a coward, I'm a coward. So he's not a coward, and that means I'm not a coward, which means, ergo factor, werewolves are real.
Definitely.
Boom. Math.
This feels a lot to me like a moral panic. Like, not in the sense that people were afraid for their moral behavior of werewolves, although there is probably an element of that. But this idea of things getting blown out of proportions based off of nothing. Just look at any other moral panic that happened throughout history. If you want to take a more Halloween-y look at it, the Satanic Panic, right? Which was nothing. But it became this massive thing because it really tapped into people's fears and desires to look for something in this thing. And something just that I want to touch upon finally, and that will kind of segue us, I think, into the actual werewolf story that I really want to talk about, is the article brings up a really interesting point at the very beginning. So the year is 1767 when this article comes out, right? When the first Gazette de Quebec article comes out, right? That's about 4 years after the British had officially taken over from the French in the colony. So you're really getting now, at least I think, and this article that I'm reading from really kind of seems to point to that also, and I agree, is this idea of being afraid of change, right?
Right.
What will come now that we are no longer in control of our own destiny here in the colony that we had been controlling for 150 years or so?
Well, even in the colonies, there's like, it's a tenuous control at best. There's still one bad winter, one bad epidemic from losing everything.
Yeah.
So that's why you get so many folk legends and folk tales, especially in America. Like if you look at like the time of what's there, because most of the legends that come in Europe, it comes from old stories that like have built up through a mythology.
Mm-hmm.
In North America, they just kept popping up. And like as if these spirits or whatever had been there for years or centuries. Well, they weren't. They were just sort of trying to like adapt to these difficult circumstances.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. So do you want to move on to the
boats?
Next? No, not the boats. The other story that he wrote, the other werewolf story.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Just quickly. And then we'll move on to the boats. Just because I kind of want to show another way in which this story kind of becomes.
Go ahead.
There's another story that, again, I'll link to the whole document in the description, that has been written down by none other than Honoré Beaugrand, who is better known as, well, for modern Montreal audiences, who's better known as the name of the metro station at the end of the Green Line, but also as mayor of Montreal in the later 19th century and a raconteur, a storyteller.
Right.
Who wrote down at least some of the more popular folk tales of his time that have kind of passed down in the French Canadian tradition and Canadian tradition in general for a long time.
Right.
And he's best known for the story that Mac is really excited for.
Well, because I'm also excited for the ghost ships in the Maritimes.
Right. Okay. So we'll get to it very quickly over this one, but I just wanted to kind of touch upon the fact that people wrote this down and it became like an even greater part of the national psyche, I guess, to have it distributed in such a way, right? This is, at this point, this is when he's writing this down, this is the 1880s, right? So this fear of the other should almost have, you would think that it would have almost disappeared, right? This fear of the outside world, this fear of what lurks in the forest would have almost disappeared.
I feel like that's going to come back up again after we get out of quarantine.
Oh my God. Can you imagine just like a whole series of horror stories that come up of like, I was in public for the first time in a year and a half.
I saw a shadow.
I saw other people. I saw more people in a room than I have in 2 years. What the hell is this?
I swear they were all ghosts.
They were pale because they hadn't seen the sunlight in so long.
They were zombies. They didn't know how to interact with each other anymore.
So dumb. But yeah, I don't know. Did you read the story, the second one?
No, I didn't know there was another one with the Honoré Beauregard. Oh, the werewolves.
Very similar to what we'd imagine. But I just wanted to bring it up since this is a more conventional story as we'd imagine it. And it's a more concrete example of the way in which this was written down. And so the only difference in this one really is, first of all, Honoré Beaugrand, in both the story that we're talking about here and the one we're going to be talking about later, just owns up to the fact, by the way, of these are folktales that are told around the campfire.
Mm-hmm.
He sets it up immediately as this place where there are French soldiers. In this case, the setting is New France once more, where these French soldiers in a fort around a fire that are just swapping stories, right, to pass the time. And some of these stories are werewolf stories. Now, there are two werewolf stories that are told. The first one, which is very interesting, tells the tale of a hunter who goes out and finds people who hadn't celebrated Easter, who hadn't.
I wonder what kind of undertones this one has.
Who hadn't celebrated Easter and who hadn't been to Mass in months.
I feel like this links to a certain organization.
Oh, you think?
That uses the lowercase t as a symbol.
So he finds these people and they have been turned into these vicious and cannibalistic creatures that have what seemingly looks like pagan rituals and dance around fires and are screaming this absolute nonsense of a language.
As me and Patrick call it, Saturday night.
Yes. Saturday night with the boys. By the way, are we still on for next Saturday to do that?
Yes, of course. I'm already getting my pig's blood ready.
Okay, great. So anyway, no, but you get the idea of he really, by the way, much more interesting story to read than we're actually, like, he really does create an interesting atmosphere, and this and the story is genuinely interesting. But I wanted to hammer home this point of the morality tale still kind of has a very big influence in this case. And the second tale is offensive in the sense that,
aren't they all? Jesus.
Aren't they all? In the sense that it's about a man, a white European man, who falls in love with a Native American woman.
Oh no.
Forewarning, if you are reading the story, they use offensive language for the Native American woman. Oh. They call her a squaw. It's not a good term that nobody uses anymore, but just go in it for what
nobody should ever use. Oh God.
So they he falls in love with this Native American woman, goes to meet her in a forest, and what he encounters instead are some piercing, ferocious eyes that really come at him and terrify him. But luckily, he manages to cut off the hand or the paw, rather, of this ferocious beast that lunges at him, and manages to escape, only to discover, upon returning to the village, that this woman, this Native American woman, who's been sometimes qualified as the witch, is missing a hand.
Right.
It's weird, but once again, hammering home the fears of people at the time.
The stories like that, they're always so... I do appreciate him building a campfire atmosphere, though.
Yeah.
Because that's how these tales would have traveled the farthest.
That's definitely one of the most interesting parts of the story.
I like that idea, though, because to me, like, I've told a lot of stories around campfires. Worked many years at a summer camp, and one of the best parts is sitting... There's just that magical moment, you know? The sun's, like, just set. You've just finished your food. And you're just ready. You're ready for a scary story.
Oh yeah, there's a mindset for it, and Beaugrand is definitely tapping into it in this case. Without further ado, how about we take a little break, and we'll come back with another tale. Ghost ships, yeah.
And we're back.
So,
welcome to part 2, Ghost Ship Boogaloo.
Folklore part 2? Okay. Just folklore in general, part 2.
The Ghost Ship Boogaloo.
Electric Ghost Ship Boogaloo?
I mean, electric isn't too far off from because it's a chemical reaction a lot of the time why these boats would appear. At least as far as we know, because in a much smaller variant of the idea of a ghost ship is the will-o'-the-wisp. That would be seen out in swamps. And that would happen because swamp gases would release and react with the air or whatever, and like all that sort of stuff. And I have to imagine that's partially what happened with ghost ships, is just tricks of the light, reflections from the light surface. They were just seeing their own boat, for example, but because of maybe the algae that was in the water or what other variants, they would reflect up and then they would see El Ghost Shipito.
There's a phenomenon that's named also St. Elmo's fire that kind of also is sometimes used to explain that. It's basically a heat reaction, not too far to what you're explaining. And it sometimes looks like a simple ball of fire that's dropping from the sky. But I would imagine that given the right circumstances, you could definitely imagine like a ship.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Something that vaguely resembles in your common area or your common life, especially in the maritime provinces where all these ghost tales come from, because surprisingly enough, you're not going to get them in Saskatchewan.
You're saying there's not an ocean in Saskatchewan?
Isn't it? Surprisingly enough, no, but I think it's the province with the most rivers, though.
Not Quebec?
No. Because it has like a bunch of small ones. It's one of the prairie provinces that has the most rivers in it. And so, you could get ships maybe if the river's big enough. But,
well, I know, like, because ghost phantoms and all that thing is also very common. Was also very common in like the deep south as far as these phantom. Because again, like lots of swampland to see the same sort of chemical and heat reactions. So I wouldn't say and if it can happen on like simple swampy water, I wouldn't be surprised if Saskatchewan or wherever had its own fair share of ghosty toasties.
Probably, yeah. I don't know.
Which probably explains, like, the whole gas and heat phenomenon probably explains why all the ghosts come up green.
Yeah.
Like, have you noticed that? Like, all American ghosts, like, whenever you hear of, like, the ghost ships or whatever, they're all green.
But it's also, like, green is scary and eerie and...
Is it?
It wouldn't be that terrifying, though, if it
all
was
people
purple.
With green eyes, you're allowed to be offended, because you are now terrifying and eerie. So, back to the ghost ships and the phenomenon of apparitions and phantoms.
So as we're saying, obviously, like these kinds of stories just appear mostly in maritime regions of, well, in this case, Canada, right? So pretty much from the maritime provinces and maybe in Ontario around the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
Maybe, like, it really doesn't go that much further than that.
It has to be a ship, you know, and a ship is bigger than, as Titanic says, it's a ship, not a boat.
Yeah, exactly. Now, interestingly, in one of the studies I found and that I used just in general research was noting that the number of ghost ships, or the versions of tales of ghost ships, is absolutely massive in Canada compared to anywhere else. Like, she notes, the person who wrote the study notes about 450 different versions of a ghost ship tale in Canada, whereas the second, right, is in Europe with 106.
Why is Canada so afraid of ships?
Right? I don't know. And
did we lose a lot of ships?
It might have been that. It might have been just because a lot of people were unaware with the territory and just went in and crashed.
Yep, I can see that.
It's very possible. There may be something also with the environment, right, around.
It might be a population thing.
It might be a population thing.
Because if you look at most port cities are the biggest cities.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the case in Canada. Halifax is not the biggest city in Canada.
No, it was one of the most important for a longest time, but today, no.
So I can see why all these people that would be living a bit more isolated would go a bit crazy and see a bit more fake boats than usual.
For sure. And again, it comes back to this idea of, especially at first, this unfamiliar territory. Yeah. You don't quite know what you're expecting. The mind can play tricks on you.
And sailors are known to be like the superstitious lot, historically speaking.
Of course. And let's face it, the ocean is still one of those places where we know the least about on Earth.
We know more about space than the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. It's that classic, I was going to say, but it's not a proverb, it's just a fact. But like, yeah, it's this idea of you don't know what there is. That's why stories of these sea creatures pop up. That's why
we still barely know what's going on with the Bermuda Triangle.
But by the way, people, Mackenzie dropped some huge knowledge before we started recording. Dropped some huge facts that I thought was great.
It's a theory.
A theory. Sorry, a theory. So dropped some huge theory.
Building on the horror of the sea, because we know about for the 1% of people who don't know about the Bermuda Triangle, it's a strange little area where there's been more reported ships and plane disappearances than any other. Yep. There's a lot of theories for this. The most common one is the fact that the more ships disappear there just due to the fact that more ships go through the Bermuda Triangle as a shipping area.
Right. Is that true though?
Yeah, just by basis of the fact more ships go through that area, so it makes sense that more are going to end up disappearing. There's just more ships there. Another theory, which I still subscribe to just for the craziness of it all, is that gas and bubbles would come up from the bottom of the sea, and they would become so numerous in quantity and so big that when they popped, they would leave a vacuum for the water to fill. And so when the water dropped, any ships on top of the water would drop with them. And that's how the ships would sink.
Honestly, I had never heard that until you mentioned it before the recording. And I still can't get over how awesome that theory is. It's just so ridiculous. And
how did we lose the ship, Captain?
How do you go about that report for a missing ship? Just writing it down. A massive bubble swallowed the ship on November 9th.
The bubble popped, folks.
It wasn't an iceberg that sunk the Titanic. It was a bubble that popped up from the...
Oh, God. But with the most... It's probably... it's the same reason what really probably happens is just there's more ships proportionally there, which is why more ships disappear, It's the fact that there's going to be more murders in a large city than a small town because there's more people in a large city than a small town, proportionally speaking. Yeah. Which is what makes the Canadian one boggle the mind of ghost ship, the sightings in Canada being so much larger than everywhere else.
Yeah. And
that's fascinating to me.
I read that. I was like, wow, no way. And then I looked into it. I was like, yeah, pretty much. And now this is versions of the tale. It might have been a single event that spawned many different versions of the tale, by the way.
Right.
It's not to say that there are that many more sightings, but that slight variations on that tale have kind of expanded throughout the maritime regions of Canada.
You can also imagine like some coming from up north, just with all the ships that were lost trying to find the fabled Northern Passage. Because I think that's something that has to be taken account into Canada. Again, that might just be the proportion of Canada has more coastline than most places. It has more coastline, so therefore more ghost stories appear.
And a lot of our exploration was done by boats and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense. It just, again, statistically, it would make sense over time.
Yeah, the use of the St. Lawrence as a shipping river.
Exactly. And going all the way up to Newfoundland and Labrador and stuff like that, having colonies all the way up there, all the way over to BC, the Northwest Passage that you were saying, that Alexander Mackenzie did a lot of it through ships. Like, you'd have a lot of material to go with. So just to kind of give a concrete example of a story of the ghost ship. So let's go a bit to New Brunswick.
Right? We have to just to kind of give us a concrete example. This one isn't really fun. It's kind of dark, kind of very dark. Now I know more fun that way.
Yeah, exactly. I know you didn't really read it because it's the version I found, or at least the most complete version I found, was in French.
Mm-hmm.
But this is called The Ghost Ship of the Baie des Chaleurs, or of Chaleur Bay, which literally translates to Heat Bay, which is near New Brunswick.
Love it.
So, bit of context, obviously. Not only were a lot of these maritime provinces, as you mentioned, or maritime colonies at the time when we're talking here, so the 18th, 19th century, a lot of them were obviously major port cities where the British and the French would land, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was the entryway into the continent. So there was a lot of traffic in the sense that there were boats coming in and out all the time. And just to imagine, obviously, there were whole like systems of figuring out who went where and how, right? There were specific ways that you needed to dock in, or else you would crash your ship.
And you don't want to do that.
Enter Captain Craig.
I love that name.
Just such a simple name.
Captain Craig.
Captain Craig is a fictional character, right? From what I understood, there's no...
Okay, that makes more sense now.
There's no actual historical equivalent to him, although probably the actions that are going to be given to him have happened in the past, but there's no specific inspiration for Captain Craig in this case.
Damn.
One morning, Captain Craig comes in to his to dock with his ship and his crewmates, and everything goes relatively according to plan. However, once he leaves, that's where things start to get kind of sketchy.
Of course it is.
Because the pilot, who helps Captain Craig and his crew kind of leave New Brunswick, when he eventually does, he hears kind of muffled sounds coming from the hull of the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at first, Captain Craig tells him that it's nothing, obviously. But upon pushing and pushing, eventually what the pilot finds, having gone onto the ship, are some captured natives. Okay, 2 captured native women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at that moment where things really start to go haywire, as if kidnapping local populations wasn't already bad enough.
It's not?
No, because basically the pilot will free them after having found them. Obviously, like there's at least some good that comes out of this.
Right.
The native women are freed, which I'm sure we could talk a whole lot about, just the fact that the native women were captured in the first place. They're freed.
We'll get back to that.
And Captain Craig starts a fight because he doesn't want them to leave. And he thinks that it's an absolute travesty towards his rights that the pilot took what he saw as rightfully his.
Right.
A fight ensues, and in the hustle and bustle, the ship basically crashes, killing everyone in the ship except for Craig and his first lieutenant. They would actually, something even worse would happen to Craig and his first lieutenant, because they would actually try to make it to the coast and drown, but they at least initially survive. And the 2 natives, obviously shaken by this experience, go back with the pilot to safe land.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the kind of eerie part of that, of course, is over the years, this ship that crashed and killed a whole crew of people has been supposedly spotted in this bay where it initially crashed. And this is where your explanations at the beginning kind of come into play. Because people, in not too dissimilar a fashion as the Flying Dutchman, see massive ships coming in, especially on stormy nights, right? Or particularly foggy days, where they see these massive ships with dead or ghostly looking figures trying to make it to the shore.
Right.
And so this is just one version of this story, but again, hundreds of versions exist that all kind of follow a similar pattern. This idea of a ship that sinks and haunts the area for generations. But obviously the reasons sometimes for the haunting can vary. Sometimes they're pirates who were cursed in the waters. Sometimes they were genuinely evil people who sunk and now try to make it back to shore for salvation, if you want, or redemption. It kind of varies, but the point remains the same. So yeah, I thought this was just a bit of a fun one to throw out.
Yeah.
It's there's not that much to deconstruct, I think, with it, like the werewolves or the next one that we're going to be talking about.
And it's like the idea of a ghost ship, there's not as much symbolism behind why. It's more just them trying to explain strange phenomena, sights, and so on and so forth that they see out at sea.
Exactly. Obviously, the analysis could be taken into a whole series of things. Like I found a whole book just on the ghost ship.
The ghost ship.
That really, that talks in detail about what it represents, and it's pretty fun.
I'm sure you can, but it's not as definite as, say, a werewolf.
No, I wouldn't say so. Definitely not.
But I like the science behind ghost ships, the fact that we can sort of point to this real world phenomenon as why it's sort of appearing. Yeah,
definitely. And it is kind of interesting. That's interesting that you bring that up, because there are other tales that do kind of have that. Like, for example, the Wendigo has become a scientific term. Like it's become a psychological term for people who genuinely want to go out and potentially eat people. Like it's a genuine mental disorder that people have kind of adopted now as a term.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't bring it up because I forgot, but yeah, it is interesting. I'm remembering it now that you're mentioning it, that a lot of these folk tales not only were inspired by real events, but have kind of reintroduced themselves in a more daily life.
Okay, cool.
Not much to say about this one, just kind of a palate cleanser between the two major ones. I don't know if you had anything else to add about it.
No, don't think so. Just remember, if you're in Canada, you have a much higher likelihood of seeing ghost ships, I guess.
Or at least, if you go to Nova Scotia or New Brunswick or somewhere around there, they're going to talk your ear off about, oh yeah, I saw a ghost ship, eh?
You know what I'm talking about?
This is offensive and I'm going to probably cut it out.
We're Canadian!
But we don't actually speak like Newfies, do we?
I was just doing a general Canadian accent. Is that specifically Newfie?
I always thought that that's where it came from. That was the joke. I don't know. I was just the way I understood.
When I went up north to the Yukon, I heard people talking like that too.
Oh yeah? Were they from Newfoundland?
See, now you're being racist.
Against, once again, just people.
The Newfies.
I mean, let's face it, the Newfies kind of deserve it.
That's definitely getting cut.
I've never been to Newfoundland. I really want to, but I've never been.
I've only been to the airport.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. It counts as traveling.
Sure. All right. So if you don't have anything else to add about the ghost ship, how about we move on to our final spooky story, which
Ghost Canoe.
Ghost Canoes, which for French Canadian listeners, they'll most likely recognize the name as la chasse-galerie, which I don't know how you would translate that exactly. Chasing the gallery. And we don't exactly know, by the way, where gallery itself comes from. why it's named like that. It's subject to way too much academic debate.
Okay.
But
I mean, just from my 2 cents, like the gallery on a boat is where the food is stored.
Yeah.
Chasing the gallery.
There's also versions of it where the original French tale that supposedly inspired this one that we're going to talk about stars a certain Monsieur or Lord Gallery, but it's contentious again.
I love contentious things.
As we're mentioning it, once again, this is a thing that has its origins in France, right? Mm-hmm. As most French Canadian stories do. And I think it's safe to say that this is pretty much a French Canadian story. I don't or rarely hear about it outside of Quebec. And a lot of the stories I hear really focus on here as a setting. Mm-hmm. So I think it's safe to say that it's a French Canadian story more than anything else. But again, this French tradition has one of the versions being a lord, sometimes known Lord Gallery, hunting on a Sunday. As long as it's not
Lord Durham, I don't care.
God damn it.
Durham or die.
I'm so done about talking of Lord Durham.
To get back on the rails, let's talk about flying canoes.
So the original story, one of the original stories, has a certain lord hunt on a Sunday, or sometimes he was hunting on holy ground. So already, right off the bat, you can see where we're going with this.
Little T church.
Because he was doing this, he was cursed or doomed to never hunt again, except for monsters and demons. Basically, he becomes a demon hunter. As a kind of redemption for having killed something on the Lord's Day, he must consequently very directly fight off the spirits of evil and deceit.
From his flying canoe.
Not a canoe, because they weren't really used in France at the time.
Damn.
But apparently he can be spotted flying overhead according to the folklore.
Okay.
Yeah, there is an element of flight, but not necessarily in a canoe.
Worst story ever. 0 out of 10.
So its actual North American origins are debated, but generally the story is placed back to colonial times around the 17th century. Interestingly, and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about ghost ships is that some of the theories concerning its origin do relate it back to the ghost ship. This idea of a ghostly entity or a ghostly body that's kind of surfing on the waters or above, that's kind of ethereal. But the reasons for that ghostliness are different. Right. And that's where we're going to get really the version that we're talking about now. Mm-hmm. The most famous version of the story was actually written by the same one who we talked about earlier, Honoré Beaugrand, in 1891. Once again, channeling all these versions of tales that have been passed down and just writing them down as a kind of amalgamation and into a more cohesive story.
Okay.
So in this version, a group of lumberjacks, they're pretty far away, right? They're known as the coureurs des bois, right, which is an old term for new French settlers who kind of went into the woods and tried to clear a bunch of land. And it's right around New Year's. And they're starting to feel really lonely. And they're kind of saying, like, we want to see our families again for the new year. And also, it's important to remember that the new year, much like Christmas, had a very important religious element to it at the time, right? A lot of these celebrations in New France, there was an added element of going to church and being thankful for what you had, in this case, New Year.
Back in the good old days when church and state were kept together.
Exactly. So there was kind of a double incentive for these people to get back home, a religious incentive and a familial one. Both can be interpreted, obviously, in a moral sense.
Yeah.
So
how do they get home?
So I don't know. Have you ever actually heard the story in its full, or you've just heard it alluded to?
Just from you. This is the first time I've heard of a flying
Really?
ghost.
You've never heard of it?
I don't think so.
That's fascinating. So basically, they're so far away that they can't really make it home in time if they go by their conventional routes.
I read about that one, yeah.
Okay. So what they do instead is they decide, well, who can we call upon that can really help us here?
Get home for our religious holiday.
And who do they call but none other than the devil himself?
The mad lad.
The absolute legend himself, Satan, shows up and he's like, "Sup, my dudes?" So I hear
We need a
you-
way to make it so we can worship God. Hey, Satan, can you lend a hand?
Yeah, it's a bit weird,
Genius.
but it does kind of it exaggerates and puts emphasis on the moral elements of it, right?
Mhm.
I understand why it's there in a storied way, but yes, it is a bit weird that they kind of want to do this. So the devil, he obliges. He's like, all right, you want to get home? Fine.
Mhm.
I'll give you the ability to, which, as we've been joking about throughout the entire episode, is a magic canoe that can fly above and not have to care about the environment. You can just go straight home. However, there's a catch, because there always is. There are 3 things that these huntsmen, these woodsmen, cannot do while they're in the canoe.
Things you can't do when you're in a canoe. That's why Satan wins. He's got better jingles.
Exactly.
Straight fire.
The 3 things that they can't do is they can't drink on the canoe, they can't swear, and they have to avoid striking churches with their magic vehicle. So basically, they can't drink and drive.
I love how you say magic vehicle just so you don't say magic canoe again.
I tried to mix it up a bit, okay? Just to make it a bit interesting.
They're fantastic boating apparatus.
Yeah, so basically they go through this entire thing, and they almost miss a few times. Obviously, it wouldn't be a story if they didn't actually have perils, right? So at some point they do actually almost hit a church, and they're like, oh my God, just you're gonna get us killed. We're so close to the end, and it's now that you're actually gonna smack into a church. But in the end, they do kind of make it home, and everyone wins in the end, right?
Does the devil win?
No, except the devil, of course.
Oh,
because
the
devil
good guys
can't.
never win.
That's who you really wanted to.
That's why I
root
love
for.
Milton.
Definitely, right? You'd fit in perfectly with Satanists.
The devil made a canoe fly. He was defying gravity.
Did you actually read the part where they call upon Satan?
I don't think so. I read up to the part where they're trying to get that one last guy because they need an even number of people in the canoe.
That's right. It's at the end of part 2 of that story. It's fantastic. This might be I don't know how much the Honoré Beaugrand, the original one, it sounds better, probably does, but the translation that I have is kind of hokey, and I love it so much.
It is.
So basically, I'll say it, or unless you want to go for it.
What they're Satan, king of the infernal regions, we promise to sell you our souls if within the following 6 hours we pronounce le nom de bon Dieu, your master and ours, or if we touch a cross on the voyage. On that condition, you will transport us through the air wherever we may want to go and bring us back sound and safe to the shanty. Acabri, acabras, acabram, fais-nous voyager par-dessus les montagnes.
Hell yeah. Thank you very much.
Acabris, acabras, acabram.
Yeah, you kind of have a dippity doppity doop or bippity boppity boop.
Something fairy godmother, you get Satan.
Yeah, so exactly. So they can't name the Lord's name, and they can't use the Lord's name in vain, and they can't touch okay, so in this version they can't touch a cross on the voyage. But the point remains the same, right? You can't
stay away from God so that you can go worship God.
Exactly. Kind of weird. I
a little oxymoronic. No big deal.
It's fine. It's for the greater good, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
so
that always works out.
Yeah, and I don't know. Did you have anything that you wanted to add? How do you kind of see the devil working in this case, or just in folklore in general? Did you see this is typically within what you'd see as the devil in the folklore?
Yeah, looks about right. Devil's making deals, plans to go renege them, all that sort of fun stuff.
Yep.
This is the usual for, your evil figures and stories.
That sounds about right. It's kind of a classic in as much as Faust has become one. It's a stereotypical story, but I think it was necessary that we touch upon it.
Yeah, and it's not even just Satan that does this, again, going back to mythology. Orpheus, you can take your wife back with you unless you look at her.
Yeah.
It's definitely. Oh, look at that. He looked at her.
It's this thing of there's nothing new under the sun kind of thing. There's influences for Satan that go back millennia, right? Long before he existed in conventional Judeo-Christian mythology. These things do appear elsewhere, but in this specific version, it is kind of interesting to see it. I really enjoy this story.
Oh, I love this story based on premise alone.
Yeah.
I think more stories should be like this. But
it's proof positive of the way in which classic morality tales, right, don't do anything on a Sunday, don't defy the word of God, kind of took on this North American flavor, right, of the canoe, of the coureurs des bois, right, the woodsmen that were the central focus, not a lord, right? No. I think that's very interesting, by the way, that it's a regular person and not a higher up or an aristocrat that is the focus of the story. Which is what makes it a folktale.
That and the fact, like, that's so Canadian, summoning a flying canoe for, like, no, lumberjacks summoning a flying canoe so that they can go party.
Would you take that deal?
I mean, yeah, probably. The only problem is they can't do their pre-drinking.
You could drink before you get in the canoe, I guess.
Would that count though if the alcohol is still digesting through your system?
I don't think you're supposed to think about it this hard.
Well, that's not fun. You mean I'm supposed to take this nonsensical tale involving a flying canoe not seriously?
It's as serious as anything you want to take it, right? People would have taken it seriously in as much as it was.
Yeah, and the moral is what you want to take seriously.
Exactly. So that's the point, take it as seriously as you want. Yeah, just I wrote a final note here of the devil as he appears elsewhere, because he does show up in other places in French Canadian folklore, and specifically in what's known as the Forge de Saint-Maurice, which was one of the most lucrative and well-known industries in Quebec for the longest time. It was not far from where Trois-Rivières is now.
Right.
Which is about an hour away from Quebec City. And you can still visit it, by the way. It's really interesting. But it basically provided ironworks for a huge part of Canada for a long time.
Right.
And what's interesting is that there are devil myths that come out of that place as well, which really makes sense when you think about it. Like, again, these men that are far away from their wives, who are constantly working in a hellish world of a forge, it makes sense that the devil would show up, right? And especially if you go there, it's in the middle of the freaking forest again.
Doing the devil's tango.
Exactly. And there's even a place, and this is just local folklore, there's even a place where they call it, I guess the closest translation you could have is like the devil's pool. Where there's a little spot, if you go in with a guide, there's a little spot that you can find that's just a little thing of water, barely more than a few feet wide, that is not hot, but that boils. Like every once in boil is a big term because it's just gas that comes out and it looks like it boils, right? And there's sometimes because it's gas, sometimes it catches on fire.
I love this.
So this mixed besides
folk tales and folklore, they just, oh my god, so great.
I've seen it. It's really fun, but it's moments like that when you say, like, well, of course, tales of the devil showed up in places like that in an ultra religious background.
Yeah. Right. All these random bubbles caused by the devil.
Yeah, exactly. But it's indicative. It's an image more than anything else, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. That being said, did you have any final thoughts or concluding notes about whether it's any of the stories that we talked about today or just folk tales in general as they pertain to Canada, or in general, just to kind of wing it?
Keep telling them. They're great. And the idea of, like, so often the movies and tales we tell today, everybody has to nitpick the logic. And I love these stories because they stand in direct face of that. Just like, magic canoe goes zoom, zoom. And it's like, that doesn't make sense. If they're flying, why a canoe? If they're just keep telling these folk tales. They just have such this beautiful sense to them.
Yeah. You're not supposed to think about it.
No, you're not supposed to think about that stuff. You're supposed to think about the moral. Why is this story being told? Not the how.
Exactly.
Just enjoy the how. Just enjoy the ludicrous image of a flying canoe that can go 150 miles per hour. Because that's the speed that they specifically say that. The canoe can travel 150 miles per hour. Like,
go back to the time when you could suspend your disbelief around a campfire and just enjoy it.
just enjoy the tale.
Now, final question for you, though. In terms of a Halloween, just to kind of bring it back to the Halloween-centric idea that we're kind of going for here, how do you think these tales stack up in terms of scariness, right? In terms of what you'd imagine for a Halloween spooky tale?
The Windigo's the scariest.
Yeah.
I'd have to go Windigo, werewolf, ghost ship, flying canoe.
Really? You don't find this flying canoe terrifying?
I mean, okay, no. Like, when I consider the fact it goes 150 miles per hour.
For Canadian listeners, that's like
almost 300 kilometers.
Yeah, it's like 275 kilometers an hour. It's insane.
Like, how fast does a plane fly?
With no protection, you just rip your hair off.
Or just, like, imagine having a canoe come flying at you 150 miles per hour.
But see, that's where it becomes terrifying, because suddenly, imagine being in what's ostensibly a shack, like a shanty.
You're in the bullet train.
Yeah, okay, you're in a bullet, right, made of wood with no protection, and you can't hit anything. You can't hit like a religious. You can't hit a religious symbol, which there are everywhere in New France.
You can't hit a religious symbol in New France. Boy, good luck.
That in itself becomes terrifying.
The fact that it's a canoe, and canoes unbalance and tip so easily, especially at the time, it probably wouldn't have had a keel, just like design-wise. They would have only had like the single keel.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Those of you who don't use canoes, or don't use boats, I guess, like, you need keels to keep yourself afloat, especially in a canoe of all things.
Again, we're kind of deconstructing it and thinking that it has the aerodynamics that it has in the water.
When really,
like, why are we nitpicking this? Again, it's a cool boat that goes 300 kilometers an hour.
But yeah, so no, like, flying canoes the least scary to me.
Okay.
And it's also like the direct religious ties bring the fear factor down, because there's like the reality of the church is scary enough.
Yeah.
I don't need stories to convince me of that, you know?
Cool.
The Windigo wins.
Yeah. Oh yeah, by far. So basically completely outside of
it's interesting tales. To look, though, how this informs French Canadian folklore, and moving forward how this would change. And like, again, like the ghost ship, again, 456 compared to 106.
Mm-hmm.
That's a major indicator of how important Canada's maritime history is.
Yeah. And you know, it's important. It's indicative of the oral emphasis that we have on a lot of these things, right? For a lot of, you know, it was only in the mid 18th century that Canada got its first printing press in Halifax.
Right.
It took a long time for people to actually like start having at least mass produced writing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So a lot of it was based off of these tales that you could tell yourself at night or around a campfire, right?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of reminds me of a moment when I was talking with an old professor of mine, when he was talking about listening to Hockey Night in Canada, right? Around the radio at the time, because they didn't have TV, but it's this idea of listening and being together and just appreciating this common thing that everyone kind of knows what's up, and
Mm-hmm.
building these new myths and these new stories together around a campfire or a radio, and just kind of enjoying this communal sense that these stories bring. And that is, I think, kind of lost to us today, in a sense.
Right.
Yeah. Not much to say in terms of scariness to kind of cap this Halloween episode off, but yeah.
Look up the Windigo. That'll give you nightmares.
Yeah, definitely. I'll probably put a link in the description.
Put the Windigo up on Facebook.
Yeah, I will. That'll be our poster for this week's episode.
Love it.
So anyway, with that being said, I think we'll end the episode here. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, send them over to us by email, Facebook, Twitter, the whole 9 yards.
Leave them as a review.
Exactly. You can definitely leave a review on iTunes. There have already been a few that are very nice, and you can support the show through the show that we mentioned at the start, through Patreon. That's Mackenzie driven. It's called Pop Canada.
If you're looking for what the format is, it's a bit more like this, a bit more free flow, a bit more are bantering thoughts and ideas back and forth.
And you can get the next episode of that is to be released next week.
I believe
by the
so,
time
yeah.
this episode comes out. So next week. Yep. So look out for that. Honestly, it's worth the $3 a month. And we might put like Mackenzie said, we might put a little preview of it just for you guys to see what it's like.
Yeah. And we also post onto there, like, sometimes like the full audio clips of our recordings for these episodes without any of the filtering.
Yep.
So like, if you want to hear extra stupid, it's a good place to start.
If you want to hear long pauses where it doesn't pick up our laughs, go for it.
That's basically
that's pretty much it. But no, honestly, support any way you can. Just tell us that you enjoy it or hate it. I don't care. Just it's fine.
Tell me you want to pick a fight. I'll do it.
Absolutely. I'm always down to slap anyone with some Canadiana.
What do you do? Slap them with a beaver tail?
Yeah, or just like whatever old book from Canada's history that I have lying around. They'll just pimp slap them. I don't know where I was going with this joke. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time on Historia Canadiana. And, have a safe Halloween, whatever you may do, and happy Halloween.
Have a Canadian Halloween.
Sure.
Go fly in a canoe, folks.
Go fly in a canoe. See, that's a proper way to respect social distancing. You fly around in a canoe and you don't even need to go up. You just ask Satan to be like, yo, get me a canoe. I can zoom around my entire town and get candy in about 5 minutes. The virus doesn't have time to catch me.
I'm going 150 miles per hour. The virus can't stay with me.
We're not medical experts. Anyway, cheers, everyone.